Where I think I want to begin is I think this is something I think I'm excited to talk about because I think this is one of the first conversations you and I actually ever had. And that's pretty much cutting through the appeal of creative, and how you say is cutting through the appeal of creative for creative sake and focusing on performance marketing. This is something I want to talk to you about first because when you and I first met years ago, I think we had talked about this, and my personal issue with creative for creative's sake is, I run an SEO agency and I get so many prospects and businesses that will come my way and be like, hey, we just finished this big website. We spent like a 6-figure budget on it and we want to do SEO in it. And I'm like, great. And they're like, oh, but we have like pennies on the dollar for our SEO budget. And I'm like, why would you spend so much on the creative side of like an art project? But then when it comes to actually performing, you have zero budget. And I think too often that happens in marketing, campaigns or design campaigns. But I kind of wanted to loop you in and talk about how marketing teams can find that balance. I think there's a lot of pressure to have state-of-the-art creative, but you also now have a rising tide of performance marketing is big. I think a lot of people find a hard time balancing it. Can you kind of speak to that? Because I know from the SEO side, I feel very strongly about it, but I think your kind of role at Bastion helps kind of from a more holistic perspective, brings an interesting perspective from
we run into it the same way from our side. And obviously it's a conversation within our teams because the way that we're set up, we have, obviously we have a creative team who works on concepts, campaigns, iterative deployments, etc. We also have an analytics group, the media group, the social group that kind of blends a little bit on the creative and the production side. And they have conversations specifically around this all the time, where constantly what we're getting built out is that our philosophy is really that we need to create creative that's going to be functional and have this balance between, creative artistry, but also functionality. What is it going to do? So in your website, example, taking the creative and make sure that creative's going to build a story that people are going to go follow down a path. They're going to submit a lead. They're going to learn something. They're going to buy something, etc. But you've got to create the creative in a way that's going to perform or inspire action. And that's our kind of hook on that side, where it used to be very theoretical and we didn't have the tools to measure impact of creative or an idea. It was much more around the sense of, this is an interesting thought. There was always that concept of being, breakthrough, of doing something different. And a lot of times that led into people doing something different for different sake. And right now we're saying, well, different's fine, breakthrough's fine, etc. But there's always going to be some level of way to quantify. So, from the highest level of general brand perception, our entire insights group does the awareness studies, the perception studies, the effectiveness studies from panels and groups, et cetera, to say, hey, are we moving the needle at a high level of how people are perceiving your brand? But now with, everybody lives with a phone in their pocket. Everybody, kind of makes a decision with their wallet. More and more commerce is moving online, which allows us to take that creative idea and understanding how it's motivating people in the real world. And then our piece has always been, yes, a lot of things are moving online, but still there's a lot of activity going offline. And we now have the technology to be able to understand what's going online, what's going offline, and not have those be separate conversations. And then from this question, bring it back to a creative message. What's working?
What I'm curious about then is you had said something like, oh, okay, well, creative for creative's sake being different. It's very theoretical. I guess what I see a lot with marketing teams, you get one of two branches, and maybe there's a spectrum, where you'll see some people who are very performance driven. Like, I don't even care about the brand guidelines. I just want to know what version of this A/B test will work for this specific Facebook ad. And then you'll see other kind of workflows on marketing teams that are much more brand creative. What does this mean to our bigger brand? Are we on theme? And then maybe they'll run an A/B test here and there. I guess what I'm curious about is what kind of direction, or are you performance first, creative first, or is there no first? How do you, from an executional point, try to balance the two?
We don't have a first. Very rarely is the world black and white. And that's why, where we are first is getting the folks who are going to measure the effectiveness and the folks who are going to create the idea and bring them into the room. So there's a lot of insight to be figured out. And that's part of the creative box. So into our creative brief, we'll bring in the specific metric or specific element that we want to move. There's always some goal in mind of, what do you want to do with this campaign? What do we want to do with this? And then also, how is it going to be measured? Because the how is it going to be measured is as important as the concept that you're measuring in the first place. Are we going to be measuring brand by, if it's lower budget, by looking at things like branded search, by direct visits to the website and having impact there? Or are we going to measure brand by putting out a sample study where we're trying to get 1,000 people to, reply to a survey and talk about, do they know you? Are they aware, etc., which obviously comes with a different style of price tag, but can be more impactful and more realistic back to a specific concept. So we actually bring everybody in together so that there is no idea of, oh, hey, I'm going to pull this idea out of left field, and then we're going to shoehorn it into a system to see if it can actually work for our client. We're going to come to the table with the ask from the client in a directed set of, goals and how we're going to monitor whether or not the creative idea is successful. And then that becomes part of the brief for then the creative to go back and say, all right, here I've got these defined parameters, but within those parameters, they're allowed to be as creative as they can be.
Got it. So it's really like there is no, I guess, one direct way, which is that, hey, you got to do performance first or creative first. It's, just when you're talking about a campaign or strategy, just have both. Like, performance needs the creative. It should be,
I guess the best way to put it is that it ends with performance. So it's not necessarily what comes first, but at the end of the day, what's going to be driving the elements of success are that the measured KPI or that performance is enacted upon. So it's more about where, it's kind of like the ends justify the means, so to speak.
Yes.
If a client wants more leads and then we come back and we say, but we improved your brand awareness 6 months into the campaign, that yes, it succeeded somewhere else, but we failed at our job. The client wanted more leads. If the client said, I want to shift perception of my brand, and through that, we know that eventually we'll get more leads, there's a strategy in there somewhere, but that wasn't the ask that we were given as an agency. Our role is to balance, client wants, client needs with what we see as best practices in the area, and then come to some solution that has some end goal. If we don't accomplish that end goal, we failed in what we're trying to do.
Yeah, how I'm kind of like thinking about it is I think the way that when you were talking through it, I think what comes to my mind is I think when it comes to creative, it's easy to lull yourself into a style of thinking, which is, oh, well, we're thinking about a logo, brand guidelines, the overall, just brand visuals. It's easy to have a nebulous, non-specific goal, like, oh, it'll just increase brand awareness. People will like it more. But I think it's, like you said, ending with performance is that, yes, creative should have open imagination and, an ability to be creative, which is space and freedom. However, we do need to tie it back to some performance driven thing, like ends justify the means. And I think that's kind of the main takeaway I'm taking is, hey, we're not trying to get in creative's way, but the danger is when you're so free that you've lost what your end goal is. And that's what you always think.
The importance is, I don't think having a performance mindset is your scapegoat to being a creative agency. Where I don't believe being a creative agency is a scapegoat for not having to be reliant on metric-based performance. The fact of the matter is, like, the world we live in and really starting, kind of in the mid 2000s when we started getting into analytics and getting, a shift much more to an online world, et cetera, is like we have been given tools that allow us to judge the effectiveness of what we do as marketers more so than any time before in history. It used to be, hey, we're going to put up a TV commercial. Sales went up that quarter. We did a really good job. But now we can go through and we can understand what, all right, we went on to TV, we were on these channels at this time, and we can correlate it to spikes in search volume. We can correlate it into organic traffic growth. We can correlate it into all these different things. And we can say, like, all right, this really motivated more people to come on and buy, I'll do it now for the family, generic widget A. And we can keep on, saying like, all right, we saw some motivating factors come out of this. We can put in more polls and get more specific with audiences to say, did I shift your opinion of brand X, Y, and Z? That allows us to tell is what we're doing as marketing, as marketers, being impactful how we experience it on something more granular than simply did sales go up this quarter or did they go down?
Yeah. So essentially, like, I guess in a sense, you're saying that like creative for creative sake or performance marketing for performance marketing, there is almost, I don't want to say no reason. I don't want to be that exaggerated, but it's in a sense, there is so much technology and capabilities that exist today that you can start tying the two together much more closely and seeing how they're impacting each other.
Yeah.
And
I think the shine of great creative and the shine of great performance marketing is that they understand that it's a play between the two entities. We are not artists. We are marketers. Yes, you have to create art, but you create art with a purpose of motivating action and activity or mindsets or ways of thinking in a way that artists do, but we do it for a commercial purpose mainly. Being not thinking of performance, you can't use creativeness as a scapegoat to forget about the end goal.
Yeah, correct. And to me, it's like maybe decades ago, as you were hinting at, as like, maybe decades ago, like there was no ability or like no one was going to spend the money to kind of figure that out. But as we'll talk about in a little bit, there are so many opportunities and infrastructure available so that you can know. So like the whole scapegoat of creativity with like, and just creativity for creative's sake shouldn't exist anymore because most brands have the ability to be tying things much closer. So that leads us then naturally to something that I think you are the biggest expert that I know about this. And even the phrasing of it, I had to lean on you. It's what you call crossing the digital divide into real world transactions and activity. And so my understanding, it's, we've moved heavily online. There's a lot of things that are going online. However, as we've seen with the pandemic, yes, there's more online activity, but at the end of the day, people are still walking into retail outlets or stores to interact with the brand in person. I think what you've been able to do, or what I'm talking about with you being the expert, is merging the two, whereas digital has always been able to track itself digitally, but when it comes to in-person visits, the understanding for me has always been like, it's just kind of a black gray area. We don't really know after that point. We just can't see. But you've talked about for years now how there's a lot, you're able to kind of combine the two, kind of talking about.
It's been a passion project of the team over here to find a way, not only where you can be able to take the concept of what conversion is happening in the physical world after we've spoken to somebody online or in the digital world, but to be able to take that conversion in a more digital binary sense and then bring it back into the algorithms that you're using in your delivery to inform your delivery off of who's most likely to do something in person physically versus who's most likely to do something online and digitally. Because that's kind of this forked path of how you're speaking and how you're engaging both of these customer sets. So that crossing that divide has been a huge component of our, us building our tech stack.
To set some context though, because for me, I am terrible with jargon. And so the more jargon that's used, the more like confused I get. So for those who are like me, who may not follow it as well, or I guess nomenclature is a new word I just learned. Yes, I know. I didn't know what that word meant for a long time. But can you give context to like, I remember when you explained to me a while back, I think you were using it in the restaurant context, but can you talk to the experience or context of what you've done for this? Yeah.
Yeah. So we use it anything that has a brick and mortar, as well as, the ideal state is anything that has an online portal of whether it's e-commerce or lead generation, and then also couples that with a brick and mortar physical location. Because there's a lot of times, let's say 60% of your sales are coming through your brick and mortar, 40% of your sales are coming through e-commerce, or flip that around. If you're only optimizing your campaign against one or the other, you're obviously missing a fairly significant portion of the pie of whatever's happening in that physical reality. So for us, working in the restaurant context, the standard implementation would have, how many people are we getting to the site? From the geo side of things, it would be, hey, if we're looking at somebody who's looking up a store locator, you'd say, hey, that's a high intent activity. Aren't we awesome? We're done with that person, or we'll change the flow to that person. a little bit later on, or they'd go off and possibly another user would go into the e-com side, order a meal for pickup, order a meal for delivery, and then you'd pat yourself on the back. You'd throw some ROI on the sheet and you'd say, job well done. Let's put them into an activation mode for, return. For us, there's a lot of steps that can happen, and there's a lot of places that can get, you can find a hiccup from somebody going online and finding if a location is near them to them actually then going in. How do we ensure to our clients that, hey, that this is an actual transaction that's happening? We are getting people to come in. And then so we set up in our system the way to find if that person who came to the website, who looked at an ad, also then wound up at one of your physical locations, actually sat in a booth at your restaurant. So we could then say, yes, not only did they look at the store finder, but we actually saw them walk into your restaurant and they were there for long enough where we're going to check a box that says, you don't sit in a restaurant for 15 minutes and just have a glass of water and order nothing and check out the crowd. You're at least going to stop in for a cocktail or something.
So, and I think that's what, like, to your point, you guys are taking it way farther than most people. Like you said, they throw out a Google Sheet, pat on the back, and then they're good to go. I think what most listeners would be curious about is every team wants this, but they don't even know where to begin with even implementing it. And I guess an answer, let's just throw that out there, is yes, hire Chris and Bastion. That'd be great. But I guess, are there things that teams can be starting to do themselves that can help, like,
depending on levels of spend, there's some folks who get close. Let's say you have a few dozen locations and you're spending a few $1,000s a month with Google. Google had a store visit conversion metric. If you're signed up with Google Places and you tie it all in together, yada, yada. But their system is algorithmic. So their system is much more about, well, how many people did you get seeing your ads, clicking your ads, versus then how many people do we typically see go into your store or one of your locations? And they put it through an algorithm to say, how many store visits would this have, in theory, led to? It isn't an actual hard count of we saw X amount of people who searched actually walk into a location. Facebook was playing with, and I don't ever really think they got it super right in terms of playing with the same type of visit location implementation. But those are two places where they have worked on it. They do an okay job at it. But really the way that we're able to make it happen, and we do it for groups as small as 4 to 5 locations that are spending, $2,000 a month on marketing, as well as brands who are spending, 7 figures a month on marketing and trying to do the same exact thing. But the only way we can do it from the 3 to 4, unfortunately, is because we have the larger guys who also help kind of facilitate the backbone. And the backbone's really getting the partnerships aligned. So we're getting a feed of hundreds of thousands of pieces of data that we're combing into, seeing about who we're talking to. And that's the reason why, quite frankly, a lot of smaller agencies, smaller mid-sized agencies, to be honest, can't actually set up the system because it's got to be set up separately. And while you can export, one of the things is that you can export and tell after the fact. And that's a fairly benign setup. But our whole thing is that we want to be able to take all the information and bring it back into our delivery so that we can be smarter about how we're sending out the next impression. And that becomes a little bit more impactful and has a higher floor of spend that you've got to go to actually make that connection happen.
So can we drill down on the benign implementation? So you said after the fact. So can you clarify that? Because I think I'm following, but what can you explain that benign and why it's benign in terms of, like, it might be easy to set up?
There's nothing that happens with the, you can tell that something happened after the fact. So there's a lot of companies out there that you can either just say, all right, here's a list of all the impressions I gave with a few other pieces of data. They run it through their system and they said, okay, off of these million impressions, you had 2,437 people go into your store. But you can't do anything more with that element of having 2,437 people coming to the store. All you can tell is that after the fact, this was basically a residual outcome of what happened. Our thing was, well, that's great, but we want to put that into our learning model so we can better decide where we're going to put those impressions from the beginning, right? You have your different layers of audiences. At that top layer, you're trying to find more people like the customers you're currently getting. So how can we refine that algorithm of who we're targeting at the top? That's going to become people who are more interested in your brand. So you've got to have that element of not only who's buying from your website, but who's going into your physical location, be able to feed up to that top. Or else we're just kind of creating a habit of only seeking out people who want to convert online when there's still a very large, there's a lot of businesses and there's a large population who does enjoy and does in fact, like to convert quote unquote offline.
So can you speak to then, okay, you can, after the fact, it sounds like you're just getting a quantitative number. That's great. So, and I guess what I'm curious about is, because I don't know as much, could you speak to like what actions you can be doing? Because I think I want to get people excited to know what they can be doing. But if you don't even know that you could get this data, I don't even know what I could do with it once I get it. What are some like things that you're able to do with
you can put it as added value in terms of any kind of ROI. If you have an understanding of what your average cost per visit yields you in terms of revenue or profit, etc., it does allow you to say that, hey, we made a 2x ROI or a 4x ROI based off of the trackable online data. And then we also know that we influenced 2,500 offline visits, which, our typical visit offline yields XYZ, and that worked out quite well. So you can add to what your holistic ROI is by understanding that this was kind of a residual, at that point, it's a residual byproduct of your campaign. It can't be an intent or a focus of the campaign because you can ingest it in, but you can understand and put credit towards the fact that you impacted 2,500 visits and most likely 2,500 sales, depending on what your ratio is for the given group. There's also ways that we do where you can actually go this full circle and take sales data and transactional data and do the same thing to ingest it back. If you really want to get into exactly what was the dollar volume that you got out of those sales, you can pull that back in and say, all right, we made $100,000 off of the e-com side, and then we made an extra $85,000 off the physical side. So that means our program yielded an ROI of 4.5, 6, or whatever it happens to be, and you take it from there. It's not, I should say, completely useless, but it's helpful, but it's just after the fact.
Gotcha. And so if you have the more benign setup, and like you said, for the teams that are looking to do that, like you said, Google has their program, Facebook has their program, but you said it's really algorithmic, meaning like, to me, that says it's estimations. Like it's not exactly pinpointing
exactly what it is.
Yeah. It's not really customized to you. It's just, hey, based on the general average of every account we have.
They actually have it in their setup. It's based off of how many people would view like your places page versus how many people get directions versus an average amount of conversions that we would see of people who went from X to the people that we'd see in your store. And then you decided a conversion percentage from that point. They do it algorithmically. They're not saying that we know that person XYZ searched for your ad and then we later saw person XYZ come into your location, which we think is kind of the scapegoat activity because you can actually manually change how they set that up. And at the end of the day, Google's also always going to look after Google. So it's very rare that you're going to see them say that they didn't effectively put a campaign into market.
Got it. So in that case, then I guess what you could think about is like, if you have not set it up, you can go through this kind of setup first just to kind of get, started with it, but know that there is a lot of estimation with the algorithm. However, there are much more
directional. And so in their realm, it's for the Facebook or the Google route, it's highly directional. It's kind of like, yes, this overall, we're seeing success happen. We're seeing this work out, etc. You should be feeling more foot traffic in your store location, etc. And there's a lot of value to directional data, but I wouldn't put it necessarily into an ROI calculation where, we're talking about people's livelihood and dollar and cents and what's the actual impact of a campaign or product. But to say that, yes, not only are we getting e-commerce ROI, but we should be seeing an increase in foot traffic and conversions on site, it's a helpful tool from there.
Gotcha. So if I was to use more casual language, the more benign Google, Facebook implementation is a vibe. It's like, oh yeah, like there's a general increase of things. We can't go so far as to say ROI or dollars and cents. We just vibing wise, we know we've seen an increase.
Vibing wise, and if we see this continue to grow over time or ebb and flow over time as it probably should be. If we continue to see that general curve go up, we know that the optimizations that we're putting in the market are working.
Got it. And then I'd imagine then, but if you got to, if you wanted to go surpassing the vibe, like, okay, we know it helps, we know things are doing well, but we want to go to the more advanced implementation, like the one you guys have done at Bastion.
Typically, that's the whole model of an agency, is to amass the buying power or the technology power of multiple groups, and then be able to create a level of either product or technology that can then get set out to all of our clients at a rate much less than they can do themselves. That's our value. That's the only way we
And
have
so
value.
the value that, like, let's say like a marketing team listening, let's say like, okay, that benign implementation sounds good, but I guess I'm curious about like what insights that go beyond the benign one. So you said earlier, like ROI, is there an ability for like, oh, we know that. Can you also merge, like, let's say someone went online because of analytics, you can kind of also know, I'm going to throw a random example and then you let me know if like this makes sense. Like we know that someone who visits the website on a monthly basis has a much higher likelihood of going into the store as well. Can you like sub-segment that as part of the traffic?
So taking it to the next level, and let's go beyond the benign and into the actual areas of, you can start breaking out, first off, what does a consumer look like? What do the online habits of a consumer look like who's going to be most apt to purchase online versus what does a consumer look like who's most apt to purchase offline? Then, so for instance, if you one that has the desire to purchase online, one that has the desire to go in store, you would message those two people differently. Right? You're not going to tell to the person who enjoys the tactileness of going in store, you're not going to tell them to use promo code followed by 16 digits, right? Versus the one who's online who will click it, they get it in the URL, they go off and they get to go do their purchase. You're going to message the person who wants in store. And in this world that we always talk about, this one-to-one marketing, that's a pretty strong bifurcation to do right at the get-go.
Yeah.
And then from that, you can say, what types of content are they reading? Where are they going online? What messages are working better to kind of bring them through the process of returning as a customer at that point? So, from that initial segmentation, you can then get the insights into the types of content they're reading. You can get into, what is the general change in age, sex, income levels, etc. So that takes us back over to the creative conversation of now, how are you going to speak to these people differently to continue them going on? You can register how many of these people who are offline and converting offline, are they part of your CRM program? Is there a missed opportunity that we're making, like how we can make digital converts of some of these offline folks and bring them into like a rewards program or just a regular email program, etc. And then from the digital folks, are there other opportunities that we can, deepen a brand relationship with them by having them come to a physical event? Or are they going to be, is that our relationship with them? They want delivery, they want only to buy through e-com, etc. And how do we play there? So there's messaging, there's placement, and there's just a general creative nuance that we found of what is the user preference and how would we react to that.
Well, no, this is super exciting because what's so interesting is that the episode I recorded before yours, Chris, was Edwin was talking about how a lot of marketing teams do not create different retargeting ads for different segments of their audience. They'll just create one retargeting ad for everybody. And he was talking about how, if someone comes to your website 10 times and already has purchased, you should not be retargeting them with the same ad as someone who came once and never came back and didn't buy anything. And he was talking about the diversification of different segments, different retargeting ads for those segments, but also sequencing them as well. Like, where are they in the funnel and everything? But I guess where and this is all kind of connecting for me, is that there's even new plateaus where, yes, there's the online segmentation, but now there's also the in-person and everything in between. Are they coming in? Are they doing a little bit of both?
So, exactly. So for instance, like we were just talking a little bit about this before the show, for our B2B side, our lead gen portion of the business, every service area, every vertical in terms of, if you're looking at finance versus healthcare versus education, you name it, every one of those verticals should be getting a different message. Anyone who comes to your different service pages should be getting a specific message to them. And then, where a lot of people kind of get paralysis is, let's just, for an exceptionally simple statement, if you had 8 services across 8 verticals, immediately you're at 64 pieces of messaging. You take 64 pieces of messaging and then you put that across or into 4 different sizes of ads you need to create. All of a sudden you're at 256 pieces of ads. And if you're talking to a designer or a graphic artist, etc., those numbers are getting big. And that's why this goes back to the blend of creative and technology, doing smart HTML5 ads versus having somebody who's going to go create 256 PNGs and then traffic them all out. It's going to be a logistics nightmare.
Totally, yeah.
That goes up to your backup topic of what do we see a lot of marketing teams wasting their time on? That would definitely be one of the tops.
If I was a listener, I would be listening. I'd be like, man, that sounds super duper exciting. I want to be not only able to segment in my online audience, but if I run both online and retail, or in physical format, I want to do both. I guess the hard question I have to ask you is, after the benign implementation, is it truly that either your marketing team has to make a large investment or you're going to have to go to an agency like Bastion to implement it? Is there anything in between, or is it just pretty much after benign, you have to get really technical?
Is there any middle ground?
An agency like Bastion who has the infrastructure to do it. So let's say a VP of marketing or marketing team wants to implement this cross the digital divide. They want to track online to physical location. After the benign implementation of Google and Facebook, is there anything in between which is like, oh, we can do it ourselves? Or is the lift really difficult where you have to have a heavy infrastructure investment or invite someone like your agency Bastion to kind of come in? Is there anything in between? Or because you were talking about how the
transition is pretty stark.
It's pretty stark. Okay.
There isn't kind of a system light just due to the different layers of technology you have to have in place. And then each one of those layers has their own minimums to get through. You can't get the data analytics just from going into a wholesaler and saying, oh, just set up a feed and we'll do a pay as use. Then can then go into your delivery mechanism and then start mapping back unique IDs to be able to tell whether or not that connection was made.
Gotcha.
That's where, the marketing world has been blessed and cursed with tools like Google Ads. Very simple, very easy to set up, but once you get into it, is exceptionally restrictive in both the information you can get out as well as the inputs you can put in. And as mentioned before, it does have a little bit of a double-edged sword in terms of quality of delivery versus fat-fingered clicks versus profit for the parent company versus effectiveness for the end user. Facebook ads or meta ads giving you access to Facebook as well as Instagram. Everybody's coming up with their quote-unquote user-friendly ad platform. But when you look into them, they become so boxed in and within their own ecosystems that what we've basically done is, this is, again, I should point out that this is more for ads that you would see outside of social. It does play into social a little bit, but we're really just tearing apart the box and then making connections that the other guys just can't do. But to do that, you just have to hit too many minimums along the way to say that, hey, as owner operator of XYZ, if I want a holistic marketing plan in place, you'd have to devote way too many resources to any single one to get that bit of data.
Yeah. How I kind of compare it to is that this is really dumbed down, but your company should have its own website. Should you do your own hosting and servers? Absolutely not. That should be something that you look to someone else to help you with. Or a more on par example, every marketing advice is oh, go talk to your customers. However, if your company wants to do an official, data backed, you have the significance to have enough data. I don't know if your marketing team is the best to go be doing that. Maybe going out and find something.
There's the entry of the benign. So you're kind of in the steps of Google and Facebook. If you have the mass to get their programs to where you can even activate it, is kind of step one. working with companies where you can do kind of one-off measures against your delivery and understand if you even have that impact would be your level 2. So you can at least tell, you may not be able to ingest it back and get all the learnings from it, but you can tell that there is or is not a real world kind of physical impact to what's going on. And then level 3, or the top level, would be to be able to work with a system in which you can gather all of that information and actually then pull actionable insights, delivery, and mechanism from it and get it back out there. But from 2 to 3, you're in the probably tens of thousands, if not, in the 6-figure range of the investment that you would have to be putting in just to make those links come together every year.
So no, but that's good to know too, because I think a lot of people, I feel like tracking is one of those things where like every step you get closer, sometimes you feel like you went 2 steps back though, because the pool just gets larger and larger sometimes the closer you step in. But I think it's good to know that there are levels to what you mentioned. And then once you get past a certain level,
having a plan and a pathway to tracking, that's one of those areas where we just see that people always understand that they need to track the end, which has some level of simplicity, but mapping out that entire middle ground is incredibly important in terms of the steps that you take people to then get to the end, but do that in a manner or system where it's actionable. Because right now, like, we just see so many people get paralyzed by having too much information in front of them that it's kind of like, where do we start? What do we do? How do we eventually get where we're going? It's like sitting on one of those road maps. It's like, I'm in California. All I want to do is get to New York, right? There should just be like, can't you just tell me to take the 10 East or something like that and we're there? Rather than, if you get into the, all the specifics, you're like, oh, but there's a quicker way. There's a shorter mileage way. You take these 560 direct. It's like going like cross country on Waze, right? Yeah, you can take 10 East and you can basically get there. You might be 20% less efficient, 10% less efficient. If you go to Waze, you'll be as efficient as you possibly can, but it took a hell of a lot of direction and kind of inputs to get you all of those pieces. Where if I just gave you every road in every direction available in the United States, it would take you a year to actually figure out what the most efficient way is, because you've just been given too much data and there's too much paralysis going on.
So the question I have also then is, there's a lot of marketing teams out there. I'll do one close to home for me. I have a friend who has a CPG product, and she just got accepted into a national pharmacy brand, like local neighborhood pharmacy brand. Yeah. I have a friend whose product has now been accepted into those, and now they're all in stores. Does the program work if you're not the retailer, though? What if you're just the brand that gets stocked on a shelf?
We on different levels, but we do a lot of it for associations, like national agricultural associations that may be in like the produce section of Variety, or other packaged goods sections that are in like the frozen food aisle of various retail. I'm trying to stick with the generic thing. And we do the same thing for them, because if they don't do direct to consumer, their journey on their site would be find a local retailer. But that jump from find a local retailer to actually going in, it's even more drastic than if you're on like a restaurant site, which is find a location near you. Find a location near you to going into a restaurant has a much higher probability than being a brand of a find a local retailer in an actual purchasing. It's a big gap. So to bridge the two is actually more impactful for our CPG customers or our ad customers who are trying to figure out if we keep on messaging you about product XYZ that we're not selling as a first party, are we actually getting people into the locations where we're selling? And that's become so for her, very much the same thing. And what I'm doing as a brand, impacting myself to go into generic drugstore XYZ with the possibility of picking it up. So there's other ways that we can do to kind of bring that full circle, but just making that jump from, I was on your website looking at the location, to I physically set foot into a retailer in which you're selling after you've spoken to me about this retailer is a very powerful connection. But like that fence doesn't need to be brought to us by the seller, but we can do it for the brand itself.
Well, I think that's become more important because a lot of D2C CPG companies, they thought they could own everything with their own websites. But I think there's a lot of buyer moving away from just going to a brand specific website, and they are going to like drugstores or grocery stores now. And so there is like, I know that from my private conversations, these founders of these CPG brands are like, well, I hope enough sell, and like we need to kind of maintain the contracts, but also can they even track that? And I think that it's cool to know that the brands can do it too. Whenever we talked about it, I only thought it from the restaurant perspective, but I think also from the brand's perspective, it's super powerful to know if it's driving people to.
We do it for a lot of food, a lot of produce, automakers, auto dealers, in restaurants, but it's basically anything that would have either they've lost track of their ability to track their advertising down to a sale level, like a distributor or like a branded product that doesn't have first party distribution necessarily, or kind of their marketing groups for a particular vertical, like a particular variety of nuts or a particular fruit or veg, etc. That says, hey, I want to promote this category in usage and consumption, but I represent a number of growers, which the grower has to go through 2 to 3 layers before it even hits the store. I may want to impact how many people are eating mangoes today, or whatever fruit or vegetable, happens to be that we're working on. How do we tell if that mango usage is actually going up, or how can I tell if I'm getting people to the right places?
Got it. So I think to round out the tracking or the digital, what is like a short way of saying it? Because I think that we haven't really named this thing. What do you call this?
I always refer to it, as you had kind of talked about, the digital physical divide. That's the simple way of doing it, which is taking that online impression and being able to see the success of that online impression in the actual world.
So the digital and physical divide. So I guess a takeaway is like, if your team has not even started tracking that, probably go the Facebook, the Google route, validate that you're finding value and your team's getting used to it. But at a certain point, you will want to graduate to a level where you need to go to a provider, i.e. maybe Bastion, to help you really get the dots more granularly like connected and everything, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's exactly the part of, first of all, verify that what you're doing is having physical impact as well as e-commerce impact. As soon as you can gauge roughly what that impact is on either side, that's going to help you make the decision about how much you want to invest into activating and being able to optimize both of those. In our I'm a big believer that it's usually around 60-40 on split, just weighted one way or another if you actually have the two different types of distribution.
60-40 split, physical and online.
It's either one or the other in terms of, there's a lot of people who are fully over to 100% e-com. A lot of people are, fully over on one way, but a lot of them are a lot closer than they think.
Got it. Okay, gotcha. And so I guess one of the other questions that came up that I wanted to ask is, there's a lot of rumblings about different data privacy laws, GA4 is coming out, cookies left and right. Does that inhibit any of this? How is that impacting?
So how we do it is completely cookieless. And we specifically stay out of the Google ecosystem. That's why they have to do it algorithmically, is specifically for the special insight that's kind of done on their systems, because they own a network. And, they have to be very particular about putting a shield around that. Same thing with Meta in their setup. That's why they're all algorithmic. So it's definitely something that we keep an eye on in terms of privacy and standards and anonymity. But for us, our whole system is cookieless, which allows it to, from what we can tell, looking out into the future in our business planning, as long as we can see about 5 years ahead, we believe that it's basically future proof for the foreseeable future. But it's going to have to continually evolve, and we'll have to continually evolve our practice around it specifically for that purpose.
Okay, good. Because I wanted to check, because I didn't want to be like, oh yeah, you should graduate to this. This is a new form of track that you've never known. Oh, but by the way, it's not going to work in like 6 months anyways. And
exactly.
Like, well, that would,
exactly.
That would be like strike the entire hour from the tape, actually. Yeah. One of the backup topics that we had, just in case we didn't have enough talking points, although clearly we did, is what do you see a lot of marketing teams are wasting their time and resources on?
That kind of goes into not embracing automation. There's still a lot of folks who are out there building out every version of every ad. Everything's a hard file, etc. And there's so many things in this day and age that allow us to work smarter, not harder. And that's where dynamic creative, changing out headlines and optimizing through color schemes or call to action styles, etc., that can all be set up by building a basic bank of assets that then can get retooled because you were talking about a little bit earlier, if you're not doing some level of A/B testing or ABC testing or multivariate testing, et cetera, it's like you're immediately kind of falling backwards in the setup. And that's where there's so much focus on creating a static asset these days, where the availability of technology or presence of the technology to create responsive ads, to create variable tests, to create dynamic ads, it's a no-brainer on that level. And it helps the performance so much versus doing everything in a static world and doing everything manually.
Well, it's like, why would you spend so much time building? Earlier, you were doing some estimations of like 256 to it, like different variants. But at the end of the day, if you're testing, 90% of these will be trashed like next week anyways.
You'll want some variation to it. Right?
Yeah, and you like hired a professional designer to spend all this time just to have it not be used, essentially.
Exactly. Where, you can say like, oh, let's try a different verbiage on the call to action, see what that does. Let's try a different headline. You can go in and update a CSV with a new headline and have that populate within seconds versus having to get 4 different people involved between a copywriter, a strategist, developer, if you're doing it in HTML5, non-dynamic, then your traffic person to put it out there and then tag that differently, etc. Versus the ability of just saying, oh, I'm going to go to this sheet, I'm going to update this headline, I'm going to give it a quick QA. And in 5 minutes from approval of, yes, let's go ahead and to do this, to implementation, it's so much more seamless. And you take 60% of the workload out of the equation.
I feel like most marketing teams are doing this. I will tell you, I've been in a lot of meetings where someone's like, oh, do you have the B variant file? Like I've been in a lot of those meetings before.
Yeah.
Is there a marketing tech stack that if the teams aren't doing it, you'd recommend like, oh yeah, just start here essentially?
I don't know about the full stack. And quite frankly, it would also depend on who you're going with. It goes into our conversation earlier. It's like, Google, if that's what you're running and that's what you're on, they have endemic tools that allow all of this to happen. And that's part of why they are the number one used ad platform out there, which they've spent a lot of time making these tools. I mean, even if it's something as simple as creating your dynamic merchant center ads, if you're into e-commerce, that's a simple no-brainer. They have their whole, ad designer, ad builder, ad planner, which is available in the free version of Google Ads. You don't even have to get to the 360 version where you can build a lot of this, functionality into it. There's a lot to be said and a lot of value around that ability that's just right there endemic in the tool.
Gotcha. And I think it's interesting you bring that up because I also hear a lot of people say like, don't trust the Google algorithm to make the ads for you. But I guess what you're saying is like, no, you like use the tool, but have guidance.
Tool, don't trust the algorithm. Yeah, I would say, if there's one takeaway from this last section, use the tool, but never trust the algorithm, because I think at the end of the day, that's their revenue stream. And it's kind of like going to a casino, right? Nobody ever goes to a casino thinking, oh, these guys want to make me rich today. I'm going to walk out of that blackjack table and they're just going to give me some money. Like casinos are there to make money. Casinos are there to always have the odds in their favor, etc. It's like, yes, Google happens to be a very effective tool. But to be quite honest, if Google really wanted to be altruistic, they would comp every one of your branded search terms in a paid ad, right? They're looking for you anyway. Like, no, please. Like, of course you should be first. Of course you should have more ownership of that first page. We're amazingly benevolent and we're in this for you and for your business. It's like, at least give me my brand for God's sake, right? I don't think that's not necessarily going to be in their business plan.
I think some marketers, they're like, oh, don't use the tool because it can trick you. But you're saying like, no, just know the parameters and then start using the automation in them. Yeah,
exactly. Exactly. And there's a lot that can be done. There's a lot of times where you're just like, oh, I think they actually, they have text tools of like, scour my site and write my own search ad, right? Go do that. Or it's, through the system. It's like, there's a lot of people and you can see them all over the place. Blindly just say like, yes, go write my own search ad from this page on the site. Or yes, go scan my site and write my own display ad. And the lack of QA that comes out of that is fairly immense. But it's a powerful tool, at least in terms of if you're not the most creative person in the world, it'll give you a starting point. And then you can take it from there. Asset development, asset creation has always been some level of issue for our clients in terms of being able to fund those types of opportunities. So having something that's going to go through and give you a starting point can be a very powerful process, but never think that it's not going to take a bit of time to refine that to make something that's going to be powerful for the brand.
Yeah, it's like if the excuse to you not be able to run certain campaigns is you don't have the resources and time to make the assets, well, this is readily here for you. And you can definitely use that to augment it with the QA there. On that,
to give you a jumping off point. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. What's funny is I was playing with ChatGPT like weeks ago, and I was like, hey, can you write a description about my homepage for me? And it was like, yeah, Zupo. Oh, if you don't know, I say it in the intro, but if you don't know, Zupo only does SEO. And it was like, yeah, Zupo's a great agency. They do paid, they do web design, they do SEO. I'm like, where in the site did you get all that info, right? Like, that is not what we do. So to that point, yes, QA'd it up because it was our homepage and it still got it wrong. But okay, Chris, I think we talked a lot about some great stuff. Obviously, Chris and the Bastion team are doing some intense tracking between the digital divide between physical and online. This is not meant to be like a 1 hour long ad for you guys. It's just more so like, hey, there is no reason why you can't start the path of tracking between, the online e-com side to the in-person kind of visits, especially for the brands who do have the luxury, or you can call it a curse, of having to track both sides of things. Well, Chris, thanks again for the time. I think we had a lot of great conversation, and like anything else, this could have been like 3 to 4 different episodes if we really went like crazy with some of the topics.
No, I appreciate it, Jason. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Chris, but by the way, if people want to reach out to you or find you, how can they do so?
Email is always helpful. chrisb@bastionagency.com. We're right down here in Orange County, as well as Pasadena, LA.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thanks, Chris. I appreciate the time, man. It's been great chatting.
Great. Thanks, Jason. Bye.